I'm really happy to be here today. It's a privilege to be invited, and Kevin's presentation is a great intro to what I'd like to talk about today, which is a little bit more of the, if you went through Kevin's, you're like, wow, I'm pretty excited about maybe I can do some metering, maybe I can do some analysis, but how do I do that? How do I, what decisions do I want to make? And that leads into really well into what I want to talk about. A few minutes on Aquacore. Aquacore is a company that does both the hardware and software side of monitoring your building's performance, and that really is our market advantage. We aspire to bring metering to your building easily with a low monthly fee or charge that pays for the whole service, and then provide like a really powerful data insight on the other side of that, where you can take that data and make energy decisions about your buildings. Hopefully at the end of this, you'll be excited to learn more about what we have to offer. So I want to start off today with a story about an elevator. So once upon a time, there was a building. And in this building, there was a really high utility bill, electricity bill. And so after some amount of analysis, the team of people running that building decided that the culprit had to be the elevators. And so they decided to do an elevator renovation project, which actually is a fairly expensive and invasive project if anybody's ever taken one of those on. And so they got ready to get started, and then somebody said, well, wait a minute, maybe we should do a little bit more analysis on whether this is the right place to put our money before we get started. So let's park the elevator for now and talk about a few energy myths. First of all, energy programs, energy management. It's kind of for like sustainability, tree-hugging people, right? It's expensive, it's complicated. Paybacks are years and years and years. How do I even know what project to pick anyway, right? Any of these resonate with anyone? These are probably the things you've heard or the questions you ask yourself. In our experience, if you target on this correctly, energy programs can be easy and cost-effective. I've actually been to these programs where a lot of companies now won't do an energy program. It doesn't have a 6 to 12-month payback. So you can see that there already are opportunities there. Older buildings are actually opportunity for greater savings, either because some of the equipment is an opportunity to be updated, or simply your building has drifted, as we call it, right? Like there's an optimum way to run your building and it's not being run optimally anymore. And how do you know what that actually should be? And then if you target your projects, you can have a really nice positive ROI if you actually know which ones to target. How do we target? Well, we have to use data. This is where Kevin and I are 100% aligned. So today I want to talk about how you get started, which projects you pick, and then what savings you can uncover and how to keep those going over time. And so we'll do this in 5 steps. The first one is we have to measure. And so I'll explain a little bit about how to measure your building. And then once you're measuring, what do I do with all that data? It's going to be a bunch of graphs and a bunch of tables. How do I actually interpret that into something that's usable and helps me make decisions? Taking that data and actually using it to apply it to your building's operations. Also picking the right energy projects and measuring the rate of return on those. And then how do you take that kind of learning and be able to apply it to the rest of your portfolio or the rest of your projects? Now I think all of my transitions got eaten. Anybody a baseball fan? Okay, a few hands brave enough to raise it. Who's the person on, I know you all know who the person on the right is. Who's the person on the left? Theo Epstein, right. You'll notice, by the way, he has a Chicago background. That's because I'm from Chicago. But he originally started out in Oakland, and then he moved to Boston, and now he's in Chicago. What is Theo Epstein known for? This is the hint from the Brad Pitt picture on the right. So if anybody saw Moneyball, it's actually a relatively true story. Theo Epstein came in to Oakland, which was a small budget market. I was talking to somebody earlier talking about how the budget really doesn't have a lot in there for a lot of extra spend on things like management and metering, right? So this is Billy Bean's problem, right, in Oakland, or Theo Epstein, sorry. And the issue is that what do I do when I have a small market and I'm trying to compete against all these big budgets, big budget teams? And so if you know the background, the way you pick good baseball players, and it probably applies to football and whatever else, is you measure how fast they run, and you measure how big they are and how far they can hit the ball, right? Or you actually more like you look at them and you say, that guy looks like a ball player, right? What he did is he came in and he said, I'm going to pull a whole bunch of data on all these guys, and I'm going to figure out how they hit against left-handers and what do they do on grass and all of these different stats. And he picked all these like really guys like, kind of off the side. And so it's a long story short, but here's the short of it. Using data instead of using their eyes or their intuition, he went to the World Series, or took the A's. I think the A's won 100 games, like 5 years in a row. Then he went to Boston, won 2 World Series. And now he's in Chicago, who's leading the league in wins this year and is going to win a World Series this year. So, you know, he has a track record of I'm going to use measurement, I'm going to use analytics, and I'm going to make things better as a result. And I think he's a good flag bearer for us in this room today. So what do I do? All right, I'm pretty excited. I want to be Theo, right? I want to win a World Series. Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out what we want to measure. And so we can measure electricity, we can measure gas, we can measure water, we can measure steam, lots of things like that. We think you should meter your building up using wireless meters. They're more cost-effective, they are easier to install, I'm glad to see the GSA put their hand up, actually, that's good. And then what you want to do is take those meters, whether they're wired or wireless, and you want to pump that data into a platform that's going to give you a lot of analytics back. All of the players, whether it's First Fuel that Kevin's using, whether it's some of the other ones, whether it's Aquacore, all the modern platforms are in the cloud. If you have a no cloud policy, you're behind. I'm sorry. You know, your building management system in the basement with a computer hooked up to it, that's last year's technology, right? So get something in the cloud. We can push updates to you very quickly as a result, and we can keep you moving on new features and new projects. And that's exactly what I'm talking about on the analytics side. We can take that data and you can look at how your building is trending. You can do things at the tenant level, whether it's tenant billing or tenant pass-throughs. You can produce reports for your boss so you look smart. You can do your own analytics and figure out the trends and so forth. And so how do you choose your meters? So the first question is, how do I want to access my data? You may have the requirement to wire your meters. That's fine, right? That's, by the way, a lot more money, but it's actually required by some industries. What level of metering do you want to do? All of you get a monthly utility bill, right? If you hook up your green button connect, and you're in DC, so you can with Pepco, then you can also download 15-minute interval data, but that's always going to be at the utility level. Well, in your building, you may have a chiller, and you may have tenants, and you may have a data center. It's a lot more interesting and useful if you actually meter up everything in your building that you think, or at least more of the things in your building that use energy, because that's going to help you actually pattern your usage on those things. Can you use existing meters? A lot of buildings have a building management system or something that already has a bunch of wired meters. A good system will allow you to be able to hook those up as well. We talked about, well, utilities. Tenant billing is a big challenge for a lot of buildings out there. Even on the GSA side, you're calling them clients, but it's the same problem. He wants to understand how much energy is the FBI using versus the CIA. I don't know who you have as your clients, but right? And
they don't want to share.
Exactly right. But you know, you want to be able, you want to bill your clients in a way where it's reasonably transparent and reasonably accurate and defensible, and there's actually value, right? For example, law firms want to be in buildings when they're audited, they can prove that they actually were billed the right amount for their utilities, and so it will add value to your building by having accurate tenant billing. And then you may actually have regulatory requirements, right? There's code coming for submetering in New York and California. I don't know if DC has it, but there's some reporting requirements here. Submetering is coming, and you are going to have to do it at some point, I'm guessing, if the trend continues of California and New York leading the way. And then how do you pick your platform? You're going to want one that shows you a lot of data. You're going to want one that allows you to share that information with your colleagues, like, hey, look at this interesting thing I just found, or here's a project that I want to kick off based on this trend that I noticed. I want to be able to compare time periods, my buildings, my different pieces of equipment inside my building. I want to be able to normalize, right? What if it's really hot in July and I use a lot of energy? Did I do well that day? Does anyone have a Nest? Okay, me too. More of you should have Nests. Nests are cool. But one of the things about the Nest is it normalizes based on weather. And so you can still have a good day, get your leaf. It's very gamified. If it's a hot day where you used a little bit less of your air conditioning than you would have if you had put your thermostat on 68, right? That's what weather normalization is. You can also normalize on occupancy. You can normalize on how the building is used and so forth. You really want to be notified if things are going wrong. You want to be notified if your building's starting too slowly because you're going to have to crank the chiller up later. And you know, if you're in Virginia, you're going to crank up your demand charge as a result. Or if you're on a tiered pricing system and you're going to be doing peak kilowatt hours later on in the day. You also want to know when you're using too much. Maybe your building starts too early, or you're keeping it too cool, or whatever else. And of course, tenant comfort's always important. And then ultimately, you're going to want to report because your boss is going to know what you're doing every day, and everybody needs that report. Okay, so here's some examples of once you have data that you're metering, how you might think about that data. This is a little harder to see than I would like. I apologize. So a building has an energy curve, and you can imagine like ideally at night when you're asleep, when everybody's asleep or everyone's not there, your building uses very little energy. And during the day, as the coffee makers kick in and the boilers start and everything else, your energy usage starts to go up, right? And so there's several phases that are very predictable and repeatable in buildings. The first one is this idea of a base load. Like, what's the minimum? You ever turned off all the lights in your house and see how fast that meter's still turning, right? That's your base load, right? Like, what is still on, right? Then there's a startup phase where I got to heat my building back up so that when my tenants come in through the day, my occupied load as the building is full, how much energy am I actually using? At the end of the day, you want to shut your building down, let it cool off, turn the lights off, whatever, and then back to your base load. And this is what we look for as patterns in the data that's coming in from meters. Now, here's some examples. Now, on the left side, it looks like this. It is not that nice top hat, or that nice, as the female salesperson calls it, pencil skirt, right? It is like jagged and up and down and whatever else. And then when we came in, we gave them, if you can see it on the right, much more of that like flat, up, run, down, flat again, right? And that's very common. In this particular case, just by adjusting their load curve, they were able to save $46,000 a year in utility costs. By the way, sustainability is not for tree huggers. Sustainability is for saving money. So this is the great thing about commercial versus residential. So what should I look at? Well, when is my building occupied? What are my startup and shutdown times? You may have a building that needs to start up really early, or you may have a building that doesn't, right? What's my base load to peak? How low can I get my energy when no one's in the building? What equipment do I have? Do I have a 30-year-old chiller on the roof? Weather and occupancy we talked about, and then just sort of best practices like trying to match that curve. If you're in Virginia and you have a high demand charge, you may have a different curve. You may actually want to leave your building a little bit higher base load because I don't want to crank up during my startup time because I don't want my demand charge to go up, to have too many kilowatts, right? So this can be specific to your region. So here's an example where somebody submetered up their building. The gray is occupied hours or business hours for the building. The yellow that you may or may not be able to see is the actual usage of lighting. And the key point is in that white spot on the left side, see all that yellow up in the high area on Saturday and Sunday? By adjusting their lighting on the weekends, they save $3,000 a year at this building. An example of startup and shutdown. Good, we can see this one. So the colors by area are sort of a purple, a gray, a blue, and a gray, and another purple on my screen at least. The gray is what we call the startup period. That's that point where there's that little dot and then it goes up. We'd like that startup period to be a lot closer to when the building is actually starting up, right? This building was starting about an hour and a half early. We adjusted the startup time, we adjusted the late shutdown. You can see the little where it goes down a little bit and then goes down to base load. By changing those two, we saved about $15,000 a year at this building. Here's an example of a building that just didn't get everything off at night. And so sort of an industry guideline is you want your base load to be about a quarter of your your daily occupied load, right? This building was get to about 50% or about half. By getting this kind of data and looking at it, they were able to save $55,000 a year on their energy usage. And then last one, just to sort of sell a little bit the idea of submeters, because this is an important concept that really helps you kind of pick, like, what are the things I should be thinking about? Even if I'm optimizing my building, we recommend one on your utility. You need to measure your utility meter, obviously, but then put one on your biggest energy users that you think you have, whether it's like your boiler, your chiller, it might be, you know, your data center, your particularly large tenant. Start with metering the things in the building that you think use the most energy and use that data and learn from there. So in this case, each of the colored areas are actually different metered parts of the building. And then how much energy are in each of those. And so if I were the person running this building, I'd say, well, what's that green? And I'd start there first. Or maybe what's that gray at the bottom? Okay, so back to the elevator. Remember we were going to pick the elevator because we thought that used the most energy? So before they actually decided to do this project, they went ahead and decided to submeter up the building and figure out what the actual energy usage of the building was. And here's what they found. Lighting and plugs was 1/3. I'm just going down the list. There was a data center in the building. That's 24%. Building cooling was 24%. The elevators represented 1%. They would have spent tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars replacing those elevators for a project that would have never had a positive ROI, right? This is why you need to measure your building, so you're making intelligent choices. By the way, the same concepts apply for water. This is a client of ours that they're LEED Gold certified. They're very sustainable. It's a very much an area of focus for them on the electricity side. Then turned their target on water. And this is a building that was using 4 million gallons of water a year, and their utility bill was about $45,000, which I guess is 100,000 showers, in case you care. When they submetered on their cooling tower, what they figured out was about 30% of that water was being used during non-working hours. So something was causing water to be used when no one was in the building. And we estimated that just by adjusting that, they were going to save about 1/4 of their yearly utility bill. And so you can see on the top here, this is how the water was being used previous to metering. Once they can't meter it up and then they started making adjustments, you can see at the bottom where there's almost no usage now on the weekends. Most of the usage is actually during working hours. It turns out in this case they had some equipment that was leaking. But you can't tell unless you actually have something monitoring that. And so the actual savings, once they did this program, $14,000. You remember it was $45,000, so maybe a third, almost a third. Payback of less than a year, and they save 1.5 million gallons and 45% water reduction in the building. Well, a lot of our customers like to do a pilot. They're like, well, I've got a portfolio of 50 buildings, but I don't really believe you. So why don't we do one building and see how it goes? That's perfectly fine. Actually, that's a great way to get started. That may not be what our sales guy wants to hear, but it's a perfectly great way to start putting meters in and not only learn how that building works, but actually learn how to work with sub-meter data and be able to apply those learnings to how you run your buildings. If it's a successful pilot, and I hope it will be, then you can add the rest of your buildings and sort of finalize out your portfolio, and most of our customers do. But again, it's this idea of learning and being able to then take those best practices and share them throughout not only your building, but the rest of your company. Data is your superpower, right? Measure first. Can't win a World Series if you don't measure. Pick the projects that allow you to save energy early and have those big paybacks, because there are lots and lots of 6 to 12 month payback energy projects. And then make sure that you're learning and sharing what you learn across the rest of your company so that you can really improve as an entire organization. And that's what I have. If you have any other questions, aquacore.com, we have lots of blogs. Kelia, who's in our marketing team, actually writes a regular blog that seems to be pretty well received. You're welcome to subscribe to that and see what she has to say, or ask me any questions, I guess, later on today. Thank you very much for having me up here today. And I'll hand it over to Joe.